Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to Meet, Marry, and Murder. This is Sanuti Spencer.
Maria Sinuti Spencer doesn't want a divorce, and if there has to be one, there will only be one winner. Frank Spencer had somebody
Okay,
else to overcome, his father-in-law, Rocco, a man with connections to the mob.
Rocco.
Rocco left him with the message that any further disputes between him and his daughter could result in Frank getting hurt
You're in
or
trouble.
being killed.
Maria's threats to Frank were so detailed, so gnarly, so disgusting, saying that she would cut off his hand so he could never hold his children again. This is the kind of thing that you learn from knowing a father who has roots in the mafia.
Detectives in Hemlock, Pennsylvania were about to unravel the life and crimes of the Sanuti family and the marriage of Frank Spencer and Maria Sanuti Spencer. Maria Sanuti grew up in New Jersey, part of a large Italian-American family. They were close. Maria Spencer was one of four kids. She had three siblings.
Maria Sanuti was beautiful, smart.
Maria had attended a law school in Georgia, an unaccredited law school. Although she was barred and licensed to practice law in Georgia, the law, a profession chosen by a young woman whose father had chosen a life of crime. Maria's father was Rocco Franklin. Rocco was an individual who had essentially resided in state prison for a majority of his adult life. Despite his prolonged absences, Rocco Franklin was a big influence on Georgia Maria's developing personality.
I think in many ways Maria may have learned from an early age that abuse and crime are things that are no problem, that perhaps are even rewarded in the way that she grew up. She doesn't have any problem with her dad being a tough guy.
After Maria's mother Teresa divorced Rocco, she and her children moved to Pennsylvania, where Maria would eventually meet her future husband, Frank Spencer. They relocated to the Selinsgrove area, which is very close in proximity to where Frank Spencer grew up in Columbia County. Frank and Maria met in Columbia County, where Frank and his family ran their junkyard business. Frank was instantly attracted to someone he found dynamic, confident. I think Maria was a very type A personality.
Maria seemed like an amazing person at first glance. She was outgoing, people liked her, she was able to really bring out the best in people, it seemed.
Frank Spencer had a very different personality. He was popular in the central Pennsylvania community where he lived.
Frank Spencer was just one of those really nice guys. He had a lot of friends, and they all considered him his best friend. I think sometimes people are attracted to people who maybe represent a part of their personality they're missing, or a part of their life that they're wishing to have more of. And I think certainly Maria looked like that to Frank in the beginning because she was kind of exciting. You couldn't really predict what she was going to do. She was adventurous. In 1997, they eloped. I think for Maria, it was something that she would just typically do. And for Frank, it kind of seemed exciting. Okay, let's do this. You know, we're in love. Why not? For Frank, it represented maybe this hopeful future where he would just have this excitement for the rest of his life, but in only a positive way. Over the years, they have two children, Cyrus, their son, and Frankie, their daughter.
Fast forward to the early noughties, and Maria and Frank looked like they were living the classic all-American family life. They had two lovely children, both of them very athletic and prominent in their community. Each of the kids had a great deal of friends. But appearances of family contentment were deceptive. Frank and Maria, by all accounts, had a very acrimonious relationship. They were at odds with each other constantly. Making up and breaking up seemed to be the course of their marriage. Defense attorney Christian Hoy got to hear Maria's take on the relationship. It just seemed that Frank and Maria's marriage was really suffering from a great deal of bickering and infighting between them. So it was a difficult marriage, by all accounts. Frank's commitments to his job became a source of conflict between the couple.
Frank's father decides to retire in 2006. And Frank then at that point takes over the family business, which is a junkyard. And, you know, he's a good guy and he treats all the employees like family. So this is this whole new family that's coming into their world now. And Maria's not so sure she likes it. She's just not cut out for this. This is not the life that she signed up for. She pined for that life that she was adventurous and risk-taking on a daily basis. Now she couldn't do that as much. She had so many responsibilities to tend to, children, family matters. And I think she grew increasingly unhappy and blamed her husband for it.
And when the Spencers disagreed, they didn't do it calmly.
The police were called several times as this violence and the relationship escalated.
The local police had been involved in numerous domestic disputes between the two individuals, property damage, property theft, each one pointing the finger at the other. Maria would later tell her defense lawyer that both sides were equally at fault. Constant fighting between themselves, some issues regarding infidelity between themselves and both of them. But when it came to arguments, Maria appeared to give as good as she got.
When these incidents would happen, Frank would call the police. He wanted it on record, but he didn't really want to press charges on her.
I think Frank definitely saw that this was a pattern of escalation, and I think he started to fear more and more for his own safety, and that's why he wanted to have the police document all of these events, and he still would call the police and he would make them file the reports, because I think he really knew that if he wasn't able to stop Maria, or if she didn't desire to change herself, that eventually it was going to come to blows and that he would suffer those consequences.
In 2006, Frank Spencer decided enough was enough. He served Maria with a divorce petition, but he didn't leave her.
The couple continues to live together. They're trying to keep things as normal for the children as they can. Frank is such a wonderful father that he proposed this amazing way to keep the children as stable as possible, and that is for the children to stay in the home and for the parents to travel back and forth into the homes so that they can have that stability that children so desperately need.
As splits go, it was far from straightforward. Even though they actually kind of physically separated from each other, there were many times where they reconciled. Let's say between, 2007 and 2010. There were many instances where they reconciled. Maria would return to the family home for months. They would have another disagreement. The police might get involved. They had many of those break-up, reconciliation moments. According to her friends, despite their difficulties, Maria did not want to divorce Frank, a fact which put his life in danger.
She's told people over the years that if he ever threatened to divorce her, she'd kill him. Well, now she's talking more and more openly about what she wants to do.
Frank first reported one of Maria's threats to kill to the Emerald Police Department in 2007. Yet Maria sometimes managed to present a reasonable face to the world and to Frank.
Saturday, February 6th at 3:57 p.m. Frank was home. Listen, I know for some strangers who will think that I was attempting to address you or I was attempting to
Mixed signals from Mrs. Sadie Spencer to her husband Frank, still living together. Would the divorce happen? And if it did, what future, if any, did Frank Spencer have?
I said only me. Me, you, and Jackie.
Despite the divorce proceedings, Frank and Maria's on-off relationship continued punctured by frequent violent incidents.
Well, we'll be back.
In 2008, Maria is arrested when she causes a disturbance at the school where her daughter attends. She goes to pick up her daughter, and her mother-in-law shows up at the same time, and she gets in a scuffle with her. Maria is charged with disorderly conduct, harassment, and endangering a child because she doesn't buckle up the child in the car. Eventually, the prosecutor doesn't think he can really make all those cases, so he arranges a plea deal, and she pleads to disorderly conduct, and she pays a $600 fine.
During the scuffle, Maria had warned Frank's mother she would have him killed. Not the first time, not the last time that she issued that warning. Former homicide detective Rod Dennery suspects that at the time, no one in Columbia County was too concerned by Maria Sadie Spencer's brash words.
I think in hindsight, obviously people wish they had taken these threats more seriously. But the reality, during that particular time, people were listening and dismissing, and probably chalking it up to what they did. Oh, she's a black widow, but not really thinking that it would actually happen.
Good morning.
Perhaps on her own, Maria would not have acted on her threats, but in early 2009, she gained a powerful ally, her father.
Rocco Franklin was eventually paroled from state prison in 2009. He relocated to a town about 70 miles away from where Maria and Frank lived in Columbia County. It was Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is the capital of Pennsylvania. When Rocco was paroled, a number of threats and a number of interactions between Maria and Frank took place, namely Maria suggesting that her father Rocco would cause him harm or hurt him if there were any further domestic disputes between Maria and Frank.
And she often jokes to friends that, if when my dad's out of prison, maybe Frank will behave.
Voicemail messages recovered from Frank's phone hint at how Maria was using her father's freedom to play games with Frank.
I'm surprised to find that my father lost that house. That's another little thing, a little joke, he's an old man. Got funny ways. Just wants you to say he's fine. I got nothing to do with it.
It appeared from Frank's interaction with his friends that he was very concerned about Rocco Franklin being paroled from prison and being out and available perhaps to injure Frank or cause him harm or confront him over the difficulties he was having with Maria.
I thought I'd let you know because I care about you, because I wanted you back, not because I wanted to frighten you. Anything, just wanted you to know that he wanted an apology. He wanted to be stubborn about it. That's on you. Take care.
Frank was definitely afraid of Rocco. Maria, on the other hand, was pretty proud that it was her father. I think that gave her a sense of power.
Maria probably had been whispering in her father's ears all these years when he was in prison about how horrible Frank was and how they needed to ruin his life. And now that Maria's father was out of prison, they could finally make it a reality. In many ways, Maria's father was probably looking for that chaos again, looking for that excitement, and looking for a reason to commit crime once again.
Despite the threats and Frank's obvious fear, he and Maria continued to swing between blazing rows and passionate reconciliations until Frank met someone new.
There needs another band.
Frank started dating a woman named Julie Dent very seriously, and I believe that really was the final moment between the two that drove them apart and drove them to getting the final divorce decree in 2012.
When Frank met his new woman, Julie Dent, Maria became really angry, probably for a sense of loss of control or reality actually sitting in that they were truly getting divorced. She would leave threatening messages and tell Julie, you don't really think he loves you, or things to kind of shake her in the relationship.
Naturally, once Frank began to date Julie Dent, who by all accounts was fairly squared away, she had a home of her own, she worked, she had a good job, a well-paying job, she would often encounter the kids. Frank would have custody of the children. Julie would spend time with the children and Frank. I think that was something that naturally bothered Maria and caused a lot of problems between the parties.
From text messages later discovered, it was clear that Maria had become increasingly paranoid about Julie spending time with the children.
Some of those text messages dealt with everyday custody issues involving Frank and Julie and Maria's children. And a lot of them, frankly, seemed legitimate from Maria's perspective. She was protecting her children. She was inserting herself on behalf of her children.
Hey, Julie, it's Maria Spencer. Do me a favor. Don't watch my children. Do not get between me and Frank by doing my children. Do you understand me?
Maria was upset about those events, and that created a whole separate set of animosity between the parties.
On the 31st of October 2009, Halloween, the harassment by Maria and her father Rocco turned into a more tangible criminal act.
The first property crime involved a breaking and entering into Frank's mother's property where the junkyard was housed, and different financial documents were stolen from the property.
But what's odd is that the only thing that's taken are business records that, could prove how much Frank actually is making, but nothing else is taken.
It was always believed that those financial documents related to custody and support issues that were being played out in court in 2009 and 2010.
Strangely, the documents that were stolen from Frank's business showed up at Maria's doorstep. Again, very peculiar. They only benefited Maria.
The records were potential ammunition for Maria in the Spencers' now acrimonious divorce, and she made little secret of the fact that they had been stolen for her benefit. Shaken but not undeterred, Frank continued dating Julie Dent.
They are madly in love, and they don't want this to ruin that. They even booked this romantic Caribbean vacation.
Maria wasn't going to allow that to happen.
The night before they're to leave on their vacation, Maria calls Frank and she says, really, I need to talk to you about something.
Maria invited Frank, ironically, to a hotel in a neighboring town on the night of January 23rd of 2010. On that night, Maria invited Frank to dinner and then to stay overnight in the hotel.
She sent a message to the new woman in Frank's life, too. Her reasons for spending the night with Frank became clear the following morning.
When Frank returned to his home on the morning of the 24th, he found a number of fire trucks, the fire marshal, and local police surrounding his burned-out building.
Frank's mother's home burns down. Luckily, she wasn't there and he wasn't there. The family dog is killed in the fire, and the house is destroyed.
As the wreckage continued to smolder, the following morning, the architect of the attack made herself known.
Maria shows up, and she clearly drives by to be seen. She's smiling, and she obviously wants people to know that she had some involvement in this or control over this particular crime.
It was believed and argued by the Commonwealth that Maria engineered that fire using Rocco Franklin to set the fire and destroy the property.
Maria sends Frank these taunting messages. one of them is karma. It's just a wonderful thing. I mean, since you just tore our life apart, your life just went up in flames. It seems fair, doesn't it?
The theory in court, of course, was that Maria was paying Frank back for taking a vacation with Julie in January of 2010, and as a consequence, the home was burned to the ground.
The fire is determined to be an arson, but there's just not evidence to show who's behind it, so it remains unsolved.
Frank began to fear what his estranged wife and her father would do next.
It seemed for sure to be escalating over time. Each act was worse than the last. And I think this is when Frank really became fearful for his life, that this is going to end in disaster and possibly his own death.
In the summer of 2010, it was Julie Dent's turn to feel the heat of Maria Simity Spencer's wrath. It began with a face-to-face threat.
Right after the bombing of Frank's mother's house, Julie was confronted by Maria at a game. And Maria told her, "Your house is next."
Then more vitriolic text messages followed.
You better watch your Julie. Her life is about to take some dangerous turns too. She's going to lose her job. She's going to lose you. She's going to lose everything. So she's constantly threatening this couple. She's trying to break them apart. She's really angry.
No one took Maria's threats seriously. In late summer, she struck again.
2010, another vacation had been planned with Julie and Frank. On August 25 of 2010, while Julie Dent was asleep in her home by herself, her home was set on fire. The side window was smashed out. Fluid was placed into the home and ignited by a road flare, and the home suffered significant fire damage. Julie was able to get out of the home, escaped off of a roof, and was able to escape without being harmed. Nevertheless, her home was completely destroyed by the fire.
Once again, fire marshals investigating what looked like a deliberate attack.
When investigators are investigating arson, they look for a point of origin to find out where the fire actually started and kind of build a theory from there. They want to find out if there were accelerants used or any other materials to get the fire to start.
A jack belonging to a Nissan vehicle once owned by Mr. Rocco Franklin was found at the scene, believed to have been used to pry open a window to allow the accelerant to be put into the homes to set the house on fire.
Car jack, a plastic jug, partially used flare.
A lot of physical evidence pointed to Rocco Franklin for the firebombing of Julie Dent's home on August 25th of 2010.
There was more.
Folks that responded to the fire saw a Corvette speeding away from the scene. Rocco Franklin owned a Corvette at the time.
The evidence against Rocco Franklin and Maria was stacking up.
Push it open. Oh, now it wants to come back in.
Maria feel very powerful to instill fear on somebody and to make them feel powerless.
Almost 2 years after Julie Dent's home was destroyed, Frank and Maria's divorce was finally granted.
The parties were actually, by law, divorced on June 8th of 2012, which becomes an important date in the case.
The divorce decree assigned ownership of the family home on Fairview Drive, Sandsgrove, to Frank. Frank should have been relieved that his ordeal was over, but he told friends he still didn't feel safe.
A number of them had been confided in by Frank in the days and weeks leading up to his death, wherein he indicated that he felt his days were numbered, that Maria and her father had something planned for him, and he had become very scared.
On June 27th, Frank wrote to Maria asking her to stay away from the house. 3 days later, news of the termination of the Spencer marriage was published in the local paper. Later that same day, Frank and Maria had a very public run-in. He had attended a baseball game for his young son, who was about 10 to 12 years of age at the time, and played in the local Little League. That evening, Maria likewise attended the game, and Frank was seen harassing Maria at the game. Maria was a diabetic and a very brittle diabetic at the time. She had lots of neuropathy, difficulty walking, and things of that sort. And all of the accounts of Frank's friends who testified at trial suggested that Frank was mocking her publicly and kind of embarrassing her about her limitations. Did Frank's mockery push Maria over the edge, or had she always planned to take final revenge on the husband who was determined to leave her? Because soon after, Frank Spencer was dead. That all occurred on the evening of June 30, 2012. It is believed from the
go ahead and do number 20 as well. Why does a mocker fear as a brawler? Whoever goes astray because of them is not wise.
46-year-old Frank Spencer had been killed, but it would be 2 days before the crime was discovered. On July 3rd, friends who hadn't heard from Frank since the baseball game went to his home in Sunnysburg to investigate.
Okay, I'll be done by
When
then.
Frank was found, he was found in the doorway of his home.
Oh, okay.
His arms were stretched out above his head, and it appeared that he had been dragged.
Within minutes, police arrived and secured the scene. The police noted prominently a gunshot wound to his head.
The second shot was a closer shot through the bicep and to the chest cavity.
Was this the handiwork of Maria and Rocco? Frank's friends were in little doubt, but detectives needed the evidence to prove it.
Immediately on inspection of crime
What? What happened?
You're looking for
opera?
blood spat or the blood.
Oh, well.
Projectile.
You did?
Look for shell cases and anything that kind of gets you that firearm information that you need. And you're looking for the angle or the trajectory for where the bullet may have went in. Also, the velocity of blood spatter, how fine the mist is on the wall, or there are a lot of different things that make a shooting different from any other murder.
The blood evidence certainly told a story.
Frank is found dead on the front porch of his home. He's lying in a pool of blood, and it looks as though the blood has been pushed with a push broom or something.
That would indicate that someone may have attempted to clean up the blood or wipe the blood.
Investigators take a piece of the tile floor, and they are able to lift from that a bloody footprint, and it matches to a size 11 Dr. Scholl's escape model sneaker, the same kind of shoe that Maria's father Rocco is known to have worn.
It looked likely that Rocco had been at the scene, but what about his touch on Maria? Finally, they found a rubber glove located inside the home. This was a glove that would be typically worn by an individual that was cleaning a toilet or a sink or using some kind of industrial cleaner in their home. That glove ultimately had DNA belonging to Maria Spencer inside of it. While investigators were meticulously processing evidence, they noticed two significant absences: Frank's truck and Frank's dog. On the morning of July 1st, 2012, the police were able to gather video surveillance from local stores and businesses that operated along the highways that surrounded Frank Spencer's home. They were able to piece together Frank's coming and goings from the night before and the morning after the June 30th baseball game. They figured that the murder happened at about 8:30 in the morning on July 1 because they saw his Harley-Davidson pickup truck leaving along the highways adjacent to his home in and around the 9 a.m. Point in time.
The problem with the video wasn't sufficient enough to tell who was driving the vehicle, but one thing is clear is that someone was driving Frank's truck from the crime scene.
The Ford F-150 Harley-Davidson vehicle was located in Sunbury Township, wherein Maria Spencer, her brother, owns a bar. So that was the first piece of evidence. Found in that vehicle was Mr. Spencer's wallet, which was loaded with cash and credit cards. So the police eliminated robbery as a motive for his killing pretty quickly. When the truck was found, Frank's dog wasn't in it.
As police continue their investigation, they get some help from an unlikely source. About an hour away from Frank's house, these two wedding planners are setting up for a wedding, and all of a sudden this dog walks in, this Weimaraner, and he's happy and healthy and wagging his tail, and he's clearly somebody's dog. He's not a stray. And, you know, the couple doesn't know what the deal is, but they report this dog, you know, has just turned up at our place. As it turns out, this dog was Frank's dog, Muttley.
The dog was found near a catering facility about 10 miles away from the home of Rocco Franklin.
The wedding venue was on the North Susquehanna Trail at Dauphin, 40 miles south of Frank's home, and just a few miles from Harrisburg, where Rocco had lived since his release from prison.
So the police concluded pretty quickly that Mr. Franklin's activities included taking Mr. Spencer's truck, loading the truck with Mr. Spencer's dog, going to the son's bar in Sunbury, and then making his way back to his home, where the dog was left unharmed at a catering facility and later recovered that day.
As detectives were building a timeline of events around Frank Spencer's death, he was in the mortuary in Bloomsburg. What the coroner had found would offer an even more revealing picture of how Frank Spencer had died.
As investigators determined that the first shot was from a rifle, possibly a longer distance, they expanded the crime scene. They went into the woods.
Frank Spencer had been shot twice on the doorstep of his family home, but both bullets had not come from the same weapon.
Investigators determined that Frank had actually been shot by two guns. One was a rifle shot at a long distance. The other was a close-up shot, and that would indicate something more personal.
When it's discovered that a shot may have come from a rifle or a long-range weapon, we're going to try to determine where that shot was fired from.
They searched the area, and it's at this point of the year, it's summertime, so the woods are all leafed out, and it would be easy for someone to hide out in the woods.
They went into the woods and they found a tree that was Y-shaped, perfect for a bipod or a tripod type steadying of a rifle for a shot.
A tree stand that was set up in a tree about 150 feet up a hill directly across the street from Frank Spencer's home.
They search this area where this tree is, and they find a spent bullet casing, and then they also find a soft case for a rifle there.
They believe the first shot came from Rocco Franklin, who was perched across the street in the tree stand, having used a long gun or a rifle to shoot the first shot that they believe went through Mr. Spencer's neck.
What happened next is less clear.
They think and have argued at trial that a second shot occurred after Frank dropped at the front door after the first shot made contact with him. They believe that second shot came from a handgun. They recovered a bullet from the body of Mr. Spencer, and it was indeed later traced back to a handgun. They believe the second shot was discharged from a handgun at close range and actually killed Frank Spencer.
But detectives couldn't prove who had fired the shots. Forensic evidence placed Maria and her father at the scene, but that didn't prove they were killers.
So a couple of months go by, and when police are trying to get them to talk,
They call Maria in for questioning and she refuses. They call Rocco in and he's okay. So he goes in and he agrees to talk to investigators and they ask him, so where were you on the day of? And Rocco is, he loves this kind of cat and mouse game. I was home all day, I didn't leave.
And during that interview, Rocco said that he had not left his home in Harrisburg.
But detectives knew differently.
Cell phone evidence is awesome. It provides investigators not only communications and conversations, but points of where they were in their travel. It's gotten advanced enough to actually make animated maps of someone's movement on crime.
The cell phone contacts that Mr. Franklin had showed him at or near the catering location in Harrisburg where the dog was found. They also located him in and around the Sunbury Township area where the F-150 had been found.
Questioned about the presence of his DNA and fingerprints at the crime scene and on Frank's truck, Rocco Franklin told a far from credible story.
And when they say, we know you were at Frank's house. Oh, that's right. I forgot. I went to Frank's that day to clean. I was doing some laundry and I used a push broom to sweep the floors.
This from a man who could not stand his daughter's estranged husband, a man who had for months made Frank's life hell.
And he said that at one point he wanted to test drive Frank's truck and purchase it. And Frank's response to him was, "I'll wrestle you for it."
So obviously you can see that he's trying to put together a reason why his DNA would show up at the scene. And he's enjoying every minute of it.
Circumstantial evidence was slowly stacking up. In August 2013, 13 months after Frank's murder, prosecutors convened a grand jury to determine if there was enough evidence to charge Maria Sanuti Spencer and her father, Rocco Franklin.
So in the months leading up to the indictment of Maria and Rocco were asked to come to testify before the investigating grand jury in Pennsylvania. Ultimately, she went before that grand jury, as did Rocco, and gave statements that were obviously under oath.
Maria, in her testimony, just goes on and on and on. She barely stops talking. She denies, of course, everything. She denies serialistic threats and everything else. But the authorities have the evidence. And so they file charges on her. They file charges of 12 counts of perjury, more than a dozen other charges, and most importantly, the murder of Frank Spencer.
In a process fraught with delays, Maria was not arrested until July 28, 2014, 2 years after Frank's death.
Detectives go to arrest Maria, and she freaks out. On the same day, authorities also issue a warrant for Rocco's arrest, but he is nowhere to be found. He has flown the coop. It turns out, right after his grand jury testimony, he boarded a plane.
Nobody knows how he got there, but he ended up living in Argentina. And he was living in Argentina undiscovered for an extended period of time. Ultimately, he was located, he was detained, and he fought extradition. During the time that he was fighting extradition, the trial of Maria Spencer commenced.
It was November 2015. Maria stood alone in the dock to answer for Frank's death.
Motive was the government's biggest piece of evidence. They had piles of text messages, piles of police criminal reports, piles of circumstantial evidence of her involvement in property crime. She had the motive, she had the anger, she had the ability, with her father having been out on parole, and that she was the driving force to get her father behind the property crimes, the arsons, and ultimately his murder.
You don't win unless I let you in. You understand? You don't win, Spencer.
Maria's conviction looked likely because of her own words, written and spoken over the course of the previous 15 years.
One of the more prominent statements attributed to Maria took place at a football game shortly after Frank Spencer's murder, where she allegedly said to one of his friends that she was responsible for the murder and that he might be next if he steps out of line with Maria and Rocco.
One of Frank's friends comes up to Maria, just wants to be safe, and he says, Maria, I would never do anything to, in front of your kids. I would never do anything to disrespect you. And she looks at him and she says, that's why you're still alive. But then she goes on and she says, the last thing he saw before he died was me.
This, said prosecutors, placed Maria firmly at the scene of Frank's death and may even have proved that she fired the bullet that killed him.
The government argued that Maria was the perpetrator of the second fatal shot. In other words, she was the first individual onto the decking after Mr. Spencer was shot by Mr. Franklin from the tree stand across the street, and that she approached Mr. Spencer as he lied in blood outside his front door on the porch deck and administered, so to speak, the kill shot with a small handgun.
Maria and her lawyers refuted that version of events.
Lots of physical evidence, electronic data-based evidence, suggested that Mr. Franklin was the sole perpetrator of the crime. We still believe that, and we still think that Maria didn't have the physical or mental capacity to do what they claimed she did.
Would the jury agree? On November 18, 2015, they retired to consider their verdict.
I think a jury and jury deliberations are always nail-biters because they're humans, and no two humans are alike. So you can have a room of 12 people, and 10 could be thinking the same thing with the other two. Dumb.
After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury comes back. Maria Spencer is found guilty on all charges. Murder of Frank Spencer, 12 counts of perjury, arson, conspiracy, terroristic threats. They sentence her to life without parole, plus 50 years.
If you're convicted of
Psalm 20, verse 2. A king's terrible wrath is like the roaring of a lion. Anyone who provokes him endangers himself.